Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Your New York Giants were quiet at the trade deadline on Tuesday. They're 2-7. Things aren't going well, and I thought this might be a good opportunity to catch up with a friend of the show, longtime NFL columnist and current author, radio host. Do old columnists ever retire, Gary Myers?
As long as your fingers still work and you can still type, it's hard to retire.
There you go. You got to keep going. You just got to keep going. So, anyway, Gary, since the last time we spoke, you had published the Once a Giants memoir about the '86 Giants, and that's a great book, not necessarily about the football team itself, but about their lives and all of the ups and downs of their lives ever since then. Since that time, you've also written Brady versus Belichick. We'll talk about Belichick uh, a little bit later on in the show, and you are now hosting the Saturday Huddle radio show. I believe that's on ESPN New York. That's
Right.
something that started in September. That's for this season only. So you are a very busy retired person.
Yeah, I never actually put myself in the retired category, and I always wanted to host a radio show. I've been a guest on a million of them over the years, so I got this opportunity to do it. I hope it's not just for this year, but it's through the Super Bowl this year, and I've had some really interesting guests so far, and the reaction's been great, and it's been fun. So
And
yeah, I
you
get to
know,
ask the questions.
it's not a Giants thing, but I saw some of your interaction on social media yesterday, and one of the things that came about in one of your early radio shows was a discussion with Jerry Jones where the name Quinnen Williams came up. So you sort of had the inside track on that one.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of interesting the way that came about. It was just a week after he had traded Micah Parsons, to the Packers, and it had been a story that came out that the Eagles had called the Cowboys about it. So I said to Jerry, obviously you weren't going to trade him in the division, but this is a New York radio show. Did you hear from either of the New York teams? And he goes, well, I would never trade him to the Giants, but I did hear from the other team in New York, and he said he heard from the Jets, and um, but the Jets didn't want to make the trade. They told him they didn't have the resources. So I said, seeing that you just got Kenny Clark from the Packers, I have to assume you wanted a defensive tackle and a number one pick, and at least a number one pick. And I said, would I be correct assuming that you wanted the Jets number one and Quinnen Williams? And he confirmed that. So that story, had tremendous legs at the time, and really got some good publicity from my radio show right out off the bat. And as it turns out, a couple of months later, they make a trade, and the end result is not that dissimilar from what he wanted out of this whole thing. Was Quinnen Williams the number one? They kind of used the Packers as the intermediary in making the trade. So Dallas wound up trading Micah Parsons, Mozzie Smith, and a number two for Quinnen Williams, Kenny Clark, and a number one. When you break the whole thing down, because a couple of number ones canceled each other out, and so he wound up getting Quinnen Williams, Kenny Clark, and a number one.
It's just it's interesting. The Jets were, of course, probably the most active team of anybody. The Jets and the Cowboys, and Jets moving Sauce Gardner, moving Quinnen Williams, ending up with five first round draft picks over the next 2 years. And of course, on the other side of the equation were the New York Giants, who ended up doing zip. And I think you were in the same category that I was in, where I think I saw you say that if the Giants can get a wide receiver to help Jackson Dart, if they can do that, they should do it. And I would agree with that. Um, and of course, if they could get somebody to take Evan Neal and Jalen Hyatt and Russell Wilson off their hands, they should do that too. Um, Looking at the way that things went down yesterday, looking at the price tags for the wide receivers that did move, looking at the fact that the reports are that the Dolphins wanted a first-round pick for Jalen Waddle. Are you okay with the fact that the Giants didn't make a move to get some help at receiver for Dart?
Yeah, well, I hadn't mentioned the Neil Hyatt Wilson thing, but I do agree with you that if they could have gotten anything for those guys, they should have just taken it because none of them. I mean, Hyatt has the best chance of the three of playing the rest of the year because the Giants are so thin at receiver. But um, as far as getting a receiver, this was my feeling. Obviously, you can't give up the number one. I would never advocate doing that. They don't have a three because that's the last part of the payment for Jackson Dart. Uh, well worth it, clearly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So then the issue to me is, do you give it? Would you have given up the two for Jalen Waddle, or a combination, maybe with a pick in 27 instead of 26? Jalen Waddle to me is one of the better young receivers in the league. He's under contract past this season, and he would have given the Giants the number one. And then next year, assuming Neighbors come back healthy and he's ready to start the season, then the Giants got a pretty good combination of Neighbors and Waddle. Waddle, I think, would be better than anybody the Giants could get in the draft, in the second round. The fact that they didn't do it, I think, is more of a function that Miami just didn't want to trade him. And why would they? I mean, I wouldn't trade him if I was Miami. To me, he's a foundation piece, and with Tyreek Hill's future up in the air because of that horrible leg injury he had, they'd be in the same situation the Giants would be, and they wouldn't have a receiver. So why would they trade him? Rashid Shaheed went for 4 and 5 to Seattle, but he doesn't have contract past this season. He's a free agent, so I wouldn't have given up. Those are still valuable picks. You only have 7 rounds, and so 4 and 5 is still a valuable pick. Chris Olave, I would have given up a 2-4. I really like Chris Olave, but his problem is he has a history of concussions now, and you just don't know. Is the next one the one that potentially ends his career? You hope not, but we know with concussions that the more you have, it makes it easier to get the next one, and we've seen that with a lot of players. So, and then you also have the factor, Ed, of you let Joe Shane make a big trade when neither he nor Daboll might be here next year. I think that there's a better chance, and there's been a lot of stories recently now that Shane has a better chance of sticking around than Daboll, and I do agree with that. When you change the general manager, you're changing the entire scouting operation, and I think it's it's a big deal, obviously, to change coaches. You bring a whole new staff, a new system, etc. But when you change the general manager, that's tremendous upheaval also. And I don't know if John Mara has the appetite to start over in that regard again. I don't know the extent of John's illness with the cancer and whether, I saw a story the other day that suggested maybe he wouldn't want to make, tremendous changes because of his health. I don't know that to be true. But there seems to be a lot of uncertainty, circling around the Giants now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I tend to agree. I feel like the head coach is in more jeopardy than the general manager. Not that you can't make a case that the general manager has made a fairly high number of mistakes along the way, but you're right. It's you're blowing up the entire front office. You're probably changing a lot of the scouts. You're changing a lot of the way that you do business. And in some cases, it took Joe 2 years to get the people and get the process and get things the way that he wanted them. do you want to throw away 2 years while you get everything set up again? And I don't know that you want to do that with a really good young quarterback on a rookie contract.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of modernized the operation, and listen, he blew the pick with Evan Neal. He blew the pick with Deontay Banks. The Evan Neal one is still, mystifying to me. It wasn't like the Giants reached for Evan Neal or took a player that nobody had in the top 10. Everybody had the guy rated so highly. I just don't know what happened. I'm not around the team every day anymore, so you might know better than me. But the guy bombed as a tackle. They tried to move him to guard. He hasn't even dressed for a game this year. So
He did dress this past Sunday.
Oh,
but
did okay.
He did dress this past Sunday, but as I pointed out in a couple of other places, that was not a reward for Evan Neal, moving forward. That was because they didn't have enough healthy bodies to avoid dressing him. They had 6 guys out with injuries.
Yeah.
That were, so they couldn't avoid it. They had to give him a uniform.
Yeah. See, one really important point, I know we're going to get to this, I'm jumping a little bit ahead, is, the argument to keep Daboll, and I like him personally. The argument to keep him is, well, he's done a good job with Jackson Dart. And look what happened. He had a bunch of years with Josh Allen. Look what he turned into. Well, Brian Daboll is not the only coach who can coach Jackson Dart. I guarantee you that there are plenty of guys that can come in and do a really good job with Jackson Dart. Was Daboll behind the drafting of Dart? Absolutely. And I had on my show a few weeks ago where I reported that he loved Dart so much that he was trying to convince Shane to take him at number 3 instead of Abdul Carter. And Shane goes, we don't have to do that. I mean, I'm assuming this is the conversation. We don't have to do that because he's not going that. He's not a top 10 player. And then he made a really good trade, trading the 2 and 2 3s to move up, 8 or 10 spots to get Dart at 25. And they found their franchise quarterback. I really do like this kid. But the reason I was advocating for him, for the Giants to get him another receiver, is you still have half a season left. Mm-hmm. And you bring in a receiver that not only would help him develop the rest of this year, but then could team with neighbors next year, I thought that would have been something worthwhile to do, because I'm really tired of watching Darius Slayton drop passes as he hits the ground.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, it's just enough is enough. But I don't think that his development of Dart the rest of the season will be enough to save his job. If he can do that and win another 6 games, and Dart plays really well, then then I give serious consideration to keeping him. But if the Giants only win 1 or 2 more games the rest of the year, how well is Dart playing that he can only win 1 or 2 games? So I think the winning goes hand in hand with him playing well. I don't think there'll be enough to rationalize keeping Daboll, because then he becomes a lame duck coach unless you extend him. Mm-hmm. And how can you extend a coach if he wins 5 or 6 games after what he's done the previous 2 seasons? So I do expect at this point now that Daboll will get fired, and it didn't have to be this way, Ed.
No,
he's such a horrible game manager that they couldn't find a way to win the Dallas game. The New Orleans game was 5 turnovers on 5 straight possessions, and then obviously,
Denver.
The Denver game was just
right.
No excuse.
I look at Daboll, and I like Daboll as a person,
mm-hmm.
But the reality of it is, I think that we've learned at this point that 2022 was a little bit of fool's gold with the Giants, and I think that you keep looking at things that happen during games, things that happen with the Giants, and you keep going, that shouldn't have happened. That shouldn't have happened. That shouldn't have happened. That game shouldn't. There's no way that game should have been lost. We can point to 3 of them this year that come down largely to whether they were Brian Daboll decisions or Shane Bowen decisions or whatever, their game management in some way, their game day roster management, with the place kicking
Oh,
situation, um, all of that kind of stuff. And you keep going over it. You look at last year, even last year, as bad as they were, they went 3-14, and you think that was still a team that should have won 6 or 7 games. And this is a team that should probably be, instead of 2-7, they should probably be 5-4. And I have to say this, I haven't published this yet. I was writing it this morning,
mhm.
and I'm not quite finished with it before we got on the show to record this. The subject of accountability has come up with the Giants lately. And you're not in the locker room, as you said, but if I throw out some of these examples, you might be able to speak to, to what you think of them. And lately we've had things like Deontay Banks running away from reporters with his pants around his ankles the other day. We've had Dexter Lawrence say, after the Giants gave up more than 30 points for the third straight game, instead of saying, as the leader of the defense, I have to take responsibility for this, I have to play better, I'm not playing up to my own standard, which he's not, clearly. He stood in front of reporters on Sunday night and said, I think I'm playing well. And what I'm generally writing about, even Brian Daboll, after the blue tent incident with Jackson Dart, he said he apologized to the Giants medical staff, but he never said, I was wrong here. He never said the protocol has to be respected. He never said that, this is for players' protection and we have to understand that and stay out of it. There's a reason why we're not allowed in there. Go back to all the incidents with Banks last year when the Giants never really benched him or disciplined him for any of the lack of hustle things that happened. Instead of disciplining the player, they fired the position coach. So for me, even when Malik Neighbors basically threw Daniel Jones under the bus after the Giants lost to the Eagles 28-3 last year, Neighbors said, well, don't look at me. I don't know what happened. I was open all the time. I was open. I just didn't get the ball. Instead of saying, as the head coach, we need to stay together. We win collectively. We lose collectively. Everybody has something to do with that. And saying, I talked to Malik about making sure that he doesn't say things that can be interpreted as throwing his quarterback or his teammates under the bus. What Daboll said was, well, he was open.
Hmm.
So what you're getting, the way that I read all of that, is there's no one being held accountable for anything. And that's how it feels to me. And I know you're not in there, but just hearing some of that, and just from your, from the perception that you have, from where you sit,
Yeah.
do you see it the same way?
Yeah, I think you make some really good points there, Ed. And it goes back to the situation rather. Brian Dable is a really good offensive coordinator, but not every good offensive coordinator makes a good head coach. And there's so much more to the job than being a good play caller, which he's not even doing this year. He's letting Kafka do it again. His primary job is to be the CEO of this team. And that, first and foremost, um, involves his game management skills on Sunday, which I find, really lacking. And the other is, managing the team Monday through Saturday and making sure that players are accountable. And all those examples you give are really good examples. And not letting that stuff happen. But he just might not be cut out to do something like this. And that his level of competence is as an offensive coordinator. And
Mm-hmm.
he does deserve a lot of credit for the 3 or 4 years that he worked with Josh Allen and taking a guy from Wyoming and developing him into, if not the best quarterback in the league, then in the top 2 or 3, and making the Bills a perennial contender. And that's what got him the job with the Giants, is his work with Josh Allen. But how long does that go for? I mean, how long can you live off of that?
Right.
And now he's going to try to make a point when he attempts to save his job and whatever's going on behind the scenes by saying, listen, this is my quarterback. He's here because of me. We see what he is. We see what he can become. It's up to everybody else to give me the players now. I mean, that's going to be his pitch to why
Mhm.
he should stay, but that's not his primary job anymore.
Right.
Um, I mean, it certainly helps that he knows what he's doing with quarterbacks, but he's got to coach the whole team, and he's got to make the right fourth down decisions and whether to punt or go for it, go for two, all this kind of stuff. And in 4 years, I just haven't seen it from him. He lived off that decision in the opening game of his first year in Tennessee when he went for the 2-point conversion, and it was like, I have faith in my team, and I showed him how much I believe in him, and I think Saquon ran it in, and they won by a point or whatever. But you forget that I believe I'm right about this. Tennessee went right down the field after that and nearly won the game,
Right.
which was a pretty good
And
indication, right? I remember that correctly, right?
Randy Bullock missed a 46-yard field goal
Right.
on the final play of the game.
Yeah, and that was really an indication of the Giants not being able to get it together at crucial moments. Just think, they took the lead on Dallas with 25 seconds to go, and they couldn't hold it, and they lose in overtime. They take the lead on Denver with 37 seconds to go, and couldn't hold it and lose in regulation. I mean, come on.
Mhm.
And I know he's not the defensive coordinator, but he's got the headsets on. And if you want to cut him a break by saying in Dallas that they played soft and maybe he thought that was the way to go, then you certainly jump when you place the same defense in Denver and say, wait a minute, that didn't work in Dallas.
Mhm.
Try something else.
Mhm.
And that's where I think he's lacking. Plus, he's a hothead on the sidelines, which is never a good look.
Yeah, and
And the 10th thing was just
it's just when players do things that need to be called out, it's the head coach who has to do that. And now
but
he doesn't have to do that by coming to us, although coaches do that sometimes, and we get that, okay? We get that. Sometimes we are the medium
right.
that sends a message from coach to player. That's just part of the deal. We get that. And we live for that, because when a coach rips a player, that's page views, so
Sure. But
we love it.
I do want to say this, that if he is actually doing what you're saying behind the scenes, if he's disciplining these guys and holding them accountable behind the scenes,
Mhm.
I'm okay with that. I don't necessarily need the coach
No.
to be supporting a player that he's ripping behind the scenes,
Right.
but I think he goes in the opposite direction, or he just is so vague in his answers
Mhm.
that it leads you to believe he's not
He's
holding
not
players
right.
accountable behind the scenes. So
Right.
there's really no indication
Right.
he's doing things like
Yeah, because there's no evidence that if a player consistently doesn't give effort, he loses playing time. There's no evidence that if a player continues to make the same mistakes over and over, he loses his job, or he winds up in a timeshare for his job.
that's a very good point. You do
Mhm.
see evidence of it on the field, whether he's disciplining guys or not. And um, yeah, I find it. I think it's going to be an incredibly tough sell to the Giant fans. And trust me, they care what the fans think. It goes back
Mhm.
to Wellington. I can handle the fans booing in December. I can't handle empty seats because that shows apathy, and apathy is the worst thing you can have. And John believes that too.
Right.
So, in December, if they're 3-11 or whatever, that there's gonna be a lot of empty seats if they're not
Um,
sold to the fans of the other team.
that's what happens nowadays, is the seats aren't empty. the seats belong to fans of the 49ers or
See,
fans of the
I was
Eagles,
really
fans of the
surprised about.
Cowboys.
I was very surprised about that. And I didn't mean to interrupt you. Um, I didn't think necessarily that the 49er fans were like the Packer fans or the Eagles just drive up the turnpike, or the Cowboy fans because there's so many Cowboy fans all over the country, just not in New York. I didn't think the 49ers had that kind of following, either fans in New York who rooted for the Niners or that they would travel across the country. Now, New York being New York, it's a cool place to visit. We're almost at the holiday season. People like to come here. I
Hmm.
get that. But I never thought the Niner fans would have the numbers to overtake the Giant fans at MetLife Stadium. So I know that John takes notice of that stuff too.
Hmm. Absolutely. Gary, let's talk a little bit about, we're talking about Brian Daboll. We've talked a little bit about CEO style head coach and accountability and all that. And you talked about Daboll being a good offensive coordinator. And I agree with you that sometimes guys reach a certain level and that's where they belong.
Hmm.
And they go above that level, and then you find out that they're as a head coach, they're a really good offensive coordinator or a defensive
Hmm.
coordinator or whatever. Um, I have always been of the opinion that, first of all, NFL owners, NFL teams make more mistakes hiring coaches than they get it right. There's only maybe 10 or 12 really really good coaches in the league, and everybody else is looking for one. Sort
Hmm.
of the same as quarterbacks. I tend to think owners don't really know what they're looking for. They just look for the latest and greatest hot offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator, or, oh, hey, this big name guy is available. So let's go get him because he's got a big name, and I know who he is, so he must be good. Um, my belief is it should never be about what your name is. It should never be about how well you call plays on offense or defense. It's about, can you lead highly paid alpha males? Can you make them buy what you're selling? Can you hold them accountable? Can you make them believe in your message? Can you get them to play? Can you do what Dan Campbell does in Detroit, which is get those guys to play, using Campbell as an example,
And
to
also to surround yourself with good
with
coaches.
with good people. Can you do those things? It's not about you're the latest and greatest fancy offensive scheme guy. Um, what well, do you agree with me? And really, what criteria do you use when you think of what should make a good head coach?
Well, you know, all the coaches that get hired do have an expertise on one side of the ball because generally they're coordinators.
Hmm.
Um, but it's then being able to make the transition to running the entire operation. And Parcells always tells coaches, you know, the next day always brings the next crisis, something to that effect. You never know what's going to come across your desk, and it's very hard to project who the guys are that are going to be able to handle that because until you do it, you haven't done it. And Robert Sala, to use the Jets example, the Jets loved his sideline demeanor in San Francisco as a defensive coordinator. And that guy wasn't here for 3+ years with the Jets. You never saw that. And now he's back in San Francisco and he's acting the same way. He's all fired up on the sidelines, encouraging his players. He was pretty much a mummy on the sidelines with the Jets, and he wasn't a good game manager. But how do you know that until the guy does it?
Hmm.
You look for the traits, you look for his personality. Ben Johnson didn't get the job in Chicago because the Bears said this is a great game manager or he's a leader of men. They hired him because they think he can get Caleb Williams straightened out, and he led half the team. And the Lions' offense was really good, so they're trying to project. Well, if he did that with half the team, can he do it with the whole team? And he's doing a good job. They're 5-3, and Williams is kind of up and down, but I mean, I think he's going to be a really good player. He's only in his second year, um, but to project whether he's going to be good making fourth down decisions or whether he's going to be kind of like a wild card, like Dan Campbell, who goes for it on every fourth down. You don't know until they do it, but you try to do your research on them and find out what they're like in their building and how they treat people and what kind of influence they have, and do the players respect them? And is the message going to translate when he stands up in front of an entire team instead of just in an offensive meeting room? It's a very, very hard decision to make, and or it's hard to know these things in advance, and that's why, Ed, you see such tremendous turnover. I mean, I haven't looked it up, but if we go through team by team, I mean, how many of these coaches have been in the job more than 3 years? I bet not a lot.
Right.
And, look at what happened with the Giants after Coughlin left.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew didn't last 2 years. Shermer lasted 2 years. Judge lasted 2 years. Now Daboll's 4 years. He's probably going to be gone. Where, Parcells was 8 years, and Dan Reese, I think, was 4. Fossil was 97 to 02. So that's 6 years, I think. Then Coughlin lasted a long time.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to find these guys. Then you look at Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
3 coaches since 1969. Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, Mike Tomlin. 3 coaches
Mm-hmm.
since 1969. I mean, how many years is that? My math isn't real good.
It's a lot. It's 69. It's 31. It's 46 years, I think.
56 years.
56. Yep. 56. You're right. Yep.
I mean, they've had 3 coaches since the last and only time the Jets won the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how many coaches has the Jets had during that period of time? How many coaches the Giants had during that time?
It's everybody wants that stability, but it's not easy to find. Like I said, I think teams get it wrong because, as you said, it's always a projection. Even a guy that's had success someplace else may not be able to bring that success to a new place.
Listen, the Giants are dying for stability. That's why Daboll's back this year. He's not back because he necessarily earned the right to be back after what happened in 23 and 24. But, it's distasteful to have to start over. It's a lot of work, and it's expensive. You got to pay the head coach off. You got to pay his staff off. Not that these teams don't have the money, but, continuing starting over is not what teams want to do. And there's no guarantee if they fire Daboll, they're going to bring in somebody who's better.
Mm-hmm.
Unless there's a coach who has a track record as a head coach.
Mm-hmm.
Daboll was a first-time head coach. Joe Judge was a first-time head coach. Shermer was not, but he didn't have success in Cleveland. Go back to Coughlin.
Right.
It ended poorly for Coughlin in Jacksonville, but he got an expansion team to the AFC Championship game twice in their first 5 or 6 years.
Right.
So you knew he can do it, and he had success at Boston College. I'd be really surprised if the Giants hire another first-time head coach if they fire Daboll, especially if Joe Shane is making the pick. I think he's learned that, okay, he hired his buddy from Buffalo, Daboll. It didn't work. And I'm not advocating for Mike McCarthy or somebody like that. I mean, I'd really have to study the list. But I do think there's something to be said for a guy who's done it, had some success, obviously got fired because they didn't have success at the end. But you think, maybe there were circumstances involved in why he didn't have success. And then you have to look at college. There's a guy like Lane Kiffin who coached Jackson Dart. Does that make sense? He got fired after 20 games as the Raiders coach, but so did Mike Shanahan. And Mike Shanahan went on and win 2 Super Bowls with the Broncos. So is it a badge of honor to be fired by Al Davis after 20 games?
Yeah, I hear you. And the whole Kiffin thing, that was 20 years ago now. That was almost 20 years ago now. So he's a vastly.
And he's 31 years old.
Right, 31 or 32.
Yeah. So is what he's done at Ole Miss, is that an indication? They're a top 10 team at Ole Miss in the toughest conference in the country. And he developed a really good quarterback that the Giants took in the first round. And you'd have to figure he's the one guy would hit the ground running working
Mhm.
with Bart because he worked with him for 3 or 4 years.
So, Gary, I made a list the other day of potential replacements for Daboll. Kiffin was on the list, McCarthy was on the list, several other guys were on the list.
Hmm.
There is nobody I know better than you to ask about the one guy I keep getting asked about who I did not put on the list.
I think
And that, you know where I'm going. That's Bill Belichick,
that's
of
exactly who I was
course.
going to say. Yeah.
And look, I don't see it. I don't, for a lot of reasons. What I really want to ask you is John Mara better than I do. You know Bill Belichick, and I do not. Um, is there at is there at this point in both of their lives, with everything else that's going on, is there any chance? Does it make any sense that the two of them would get together at this point? With the New York Giants.
Wow. Um, I mean, I've thought about it. I haven't given it a tremendous amount of thought. First of all, so I'll just think out loud here for you. Um, I think Belichick would do it in a second. Now, when they hired Joe Judge, or maybe it was Shermer, I can't remember. Maybe I think it might have been
I
Shermer.
know there was. I know that Belichick had given Joe Judge a very good reference, for the Giants.
Right. So it could have been when they hired Shermer. My point is, I spoke to Belichick in 2020. I actually sat next to him at a Hall of Fame meeting in Canton when we were picking the Centennial class, and he was added. We had a blue ribbon panel committee of 25. It was like 12 of our regular voters, of which I'm one of them, and then they had a bunch of people like Belichick, Ron Wolf, Bill Polian was on the committee. So I happened to sit next to Belichick for an 8-hour meeting. And I'm not sure I've said this anywhere, so this might be insightful. I had spoken to Belichick, and I said, during one of our breaks, and I said, I really thought like in 2018, is that the year they hired Shermer?
That's the year they hired Shermer. Yes.
And it was also the year there was some stories coming out about unrest in New England. And I said, I really thought that was the time for you to come back. And he said, at this point in my life, I didn't think I had the energy to rebuild the front office, and it needed to be rebuilt. And so I thought that was really interesting. But it was also during a period where he never could have imagined that he was ever going to get fired there.
Right.
And although he was on the outs with Brady, he probably figured I'll just go draft another quarterback and I'll start another run. Now his circumstances are totally different. He gets fired in New England. He's, I think, 15 victories short of Shula,
Mm-hmm.
count regular season and playoffs. And I know that's important to him, although he'll never admit that. I also know it's important to him to win a Super Bowl without Brady, because although I don't think it counts in the Brady Belichick argument, and I discuss this in my book is about who gets the credit for what they did together, not who proved they can win when they weren't together. And Brady obviously proved that, but Belichick didn't. But I still think it's something Belichick very much wants to do. So that being said, I think he would come back, especially with all the stuff going on in North Carolina. There were even stories a couple of weeks ago, were they going to buy him out? Was he going to walk away? So, I mean, I think there's something to that it's not all going as he anticipated.
Right.
Now, so the issue then, Ed, is would the Giants want him back? So I go back to 1997 when they hired Fossil, and Bob Tisch finally came around to Wellington Mara and said, okay, we can bring Parcells back. This is when he was going to the Jets. And I know this happened, that Tisch had been the holdout. Wellington wanted to bring him back. George Young wanted no part of him. So there's a meeting in Wellington's office in which Tisch says, okay, we can bring him back. George wanted to hire Fossil. He wanted no part of Parcells 2.0. George runs down his office as if George maybe just kind of waddled down.
Yeah, probably waddled.
Fossil was in a New Jersey hotel. Before Wellington can come down to his office to say, we're hiring, we want to hire, we've made the decision, we want to hire Parcells. George got on the phone to Fossil in the hotel and offered him the job. Wellington comes down to George's office and said, Bob and I decided we want Parcells. Oh, I had George used to moan and groan. Oh, I just offered the job to Fossil. And Wellington, being a man of integrity, said, okay, then we'll go with that. He didn't want George, or he didn't want to do it himself, to call Fossil and say, sorry, we had miscommunication here. We're hiring somebody else. He wouldn't force George to do it, and he wouldn't do it himself. And although the rumor had been all along, and this is a very long-winded explanation, the rumor had been all along that Parcells was going to the Jets and all that, he would have taken the Giant job. And Wellington and Tisch wanted him back, but they wouldn't overrule George, as they never did on a football decision. Well, all right, fast forward to 2025. Would they take Belichick back? Well, if history proves anything, it's that I think that Mara and Steve Tisch now would have a long discussion about it. And they'd say, well, we're probably only going to get him for 3 years. It didn't end well for him in New England. Is that an indication that he's kind of lost his touch, or the game has passed him by, or any excuse you want to make for not hiring him? Is the girlfriend thing an embarrassment? How would our fans react to that? But they might also say, looking at all the potential candidates, who gives us the best chance to win, which is what it's all about. And if he only stays 3 years, but he can get us in a Super Bowl, is that worth it? And that's the same argument that I've used why Jerry Jones should have fired McCarthy 2 years ago after Belichick got fired by the Patriots. And he should have fired McCarthy and brought in Belichick, because even if it was only for 3 years and you get him to a Super Bowl, it's worth it. And then you go hire somebody else. And it's why the Chargers, considered Belichick before they hired Harbaugh. And Dean Spanos called Jimmy Johnson, who's very tight with Belichick, and Jimmy said, hire him, because if he gets you a Super Bowl in 3 years, it's worth it. And because Spanos was saying, what happens if he only coaches 2 or 3 years? And Jimmy was saying, but if you get a Super Bowl, it's worth it. And that's what I would say about the Giants. It would be worth it if he gets to a Super Bowl. It's just that they have to make the determination, can he coexist with Shane if they want to keep Shane? And if not, are they going to give Belichick the personnel power? And I think that was his undoing in New England. So if he agrees to work with Shane, and I think that Parcells would give Shane a good recommendation to Belichick because they worked together in Miami, I would do it. Because I think that Belichick is more of a sure thing, despite what's happened the last 2 or 3 years. 4-13 his last year in New England, which I think was all based on he didn't have a quarterback. He couldn't make it work with Mac Jones for whatever reason. Let's have a quarterback now. He's got to hire a good offensive coordinator. He's not going to get Josh McDaniels out of New England, but he's not the only one. I mean, Ed, this is totally an unrealistic scenario that I'm going to give you. But Belichick, with Brian Daboll as the offensive coordinator, I'd sign off on that in a second. But it can't happen.
It can't happen, right?
Right. It's different than Vance Joseph being the head coach of the Broncos, leaving for a few years, and going back to the Broncos as the defensive coordinator for Sean Payton, because there was a period of time in between.
Right.
You can't go from being the head coach to the offensive coordinator. But maybe Belichick likes Kafka. And if Kafka doesn't, he's interviewed for a bunch of head coaching jobs, but if he doesn't get one, you keep Kafka as the coordinator, and then you have the continuity that you're looking for.
It's an interesting scenario.
Yeah.
As I said, I didn't put him on my list. Not that my list was authoritative. It was basically names to consider, and you've actually given me some food for thought in terms of the possibility of Belichick. I think you're 100% right that Bill would still he would jump at an NFL opportunity
I
if
want to
given one.
make two other points to you. One is he loves the Giants.
Mhm.
I mean, he loves the Giants. He gets emotional and melancholy reminiscing about his Giant years. Oh, that was a long time ago. It's Giants are still in his heart. The
Mhm.
second thing is I do know that John Mara has a good relationship with Bill. Whether that means he would hire him, I don't know.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not sure that Steve Tisch even knows Belichick
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
because that was the Tisch's first year of ownership was Belichick's first year in Cleveland. So he had just left. So they
Mhm.
didn't overlap at all. Maybe he's gotten to know him at league meetings over the years. I don't know. But I know that John likes Bill, that he has certainly checked with Bill when he before he hired Judge. I would be shocked if he didn't talk to him about Daboll, who was a Patriot assistant coach for a bunch of years. That's another thing that Daboll could work for Belichick because he's done it before. It's just that under things have changed, and he's the head coach of the Giants now. It would be beyond awkward for him to be
Right.
the offensive coordinator for the Giants right now. In 4 years, maybe that would be something that could happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, Gary, fascinating discussion, fascinating to think about the Belichick possibility. And as always, I appreciate all of the insight. I know you got the books out there. You've got the radio show. You want to just let folks know, where they can listen, where they can
Yeah,
get the book.
yeah. My book, Brady versus Belichick: The Dynasty Debate, it's been out since September 16th, and you can get it on Amazon. You can go into any bookstore; it's there. Any other online services, and my radio show's on ESP New York 880 here in the city, and it's from noon to 3 every Saturday afternoon. And you have given me something to think about whether I want to talk about Belichick on the radio show Saturday, because it is a great talking point, and it's not totally unrealistic. It's just
So
not.
we'll have to see. It's unfortunate in a way that the Giants are here again, most likely searching for another head coach, but we shall see. It'll be an interesting offseason. And Gary, thank you as always. Giants fans, thank you as always for watching. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.